Welcome back, family. Gonna do something a little bit different today. As you may have seen, I recently did a Sony FX6 unboxing here on the channel. Super exciting, really loving the camera so far. And speaking of that, I've actually used it on a couple of gigs now, and I have some thoughts surrounding whether or not I think it's worth upgrading to if you're coming from a mirrorless rig like I did. I'm not gonna lie, after I got done with that unboxing video and spent the next couple days really deep diving into the FX6, I got really intimidated. It's an entirely different ball game. The menus are different, the shooting experience is different, the handling is different. It's just a different beast entirely. And I think that it's something that not enough people on YouTube are talking about, and I wanted to shed some light on it based on my personal experience. I want to start things off by explaining kind of why I chose to go with the FX6 and why I thought it was a great stepping stone going up from the A7S III to become my new daily workhorse. To be completely honest, one of the main reasons I decided to pick this camera up was simply the body design and the ergonomics. I grew up on camcorders. My first experience really dabbling into video was playing with the family camcorder, and the FX6 just looks like a huge camcorder on steroids, which I am a huge fan of. It kind of has a retro look to it, and it just is a professional video style body. The next reason is really I just thought it was a better investment. I think that Sony tends to kind of support those cameras longer. You still see people in the field with FS7s and FS5s, and going hand in hand in that, this camera just aligns with my goals a bit better than something like the Alpha cameras. I want to work my way onto bigger sets. I want to do more documentary work. I want to do more run and gun, one-man band type stuff. And that's where the FX6 really truly shines. It is such a great camera for solo operators and filmmakers, and I can really see myself growing with it long term. So now that we've done a little bit of a deep dive into why I decided to get the camera, I want to move into kind of a pros and cons segment, because I've used the camera on a couple of gigs now and I can definitely see its strengths and weaknesses that come into play. And we'll go ahead and start with the pros. This camera handles so much better than the A7S III when in the field. I just got off of doing some pretty rigorous event work with the FX6, and I had the A7S on the gimbal, and I just much prefer using the FX6. It really has such nice handling. The button layout is much better. You can customize so much more on it. The next major pro for me is going to be the image quality, which is honestly nothing new. I've got the A7S, which supposedly shares the same exact sensor as the FX6, so I'm used to getting the amazing, beautiful image that I get from the FX6 out of the A7S, and I've never been unhappy with it. I've always been very pleased. Something about the 12 megapixel sensor in these cameras really just renders a more filmic looking soft image to me. I know some people prefer the A7 IV, the A7R5 image that's like downsampled from 6K, but then you get some of that digital sharpness that people want to complain about and stuff. So I think that this is really the sweet spot of giving you the most filmic looking image straight out of camera. The last major pro, and what I was most excited about other than the body design moving to this camera, is the internal variable ND filter. Now, I've probably watched every video that there is to watch on YouTube about the FX6. I do a lot of intensive research when I go to buy a new camera, and everybody said the same thing. The internal variable ND is life-changing. And I didn't think they were being dramatic necessarily, but I was like, come on, like, how good can this thing actually be? And let me tell you, brother, it's good. It's really good. So now that we've gone over the pros of the camera and I've gushed about it enough, we'll move over to the cons, and there really aren't that many. It's just a couple things that I would almost consider to be more quirks than anything that you end up having to work around, and we'll get into those now. The main big one to me, and this is honestly just such a flop on Sony's part, with this being otherwise the perfect run and gun camera, it has no 3.5mm audio jack on it, which is pretty ridiculous. It's not on the body, it's not on the handle, it does not have one. And speaking of that, you have to have the handle on the body to get usable audio anyway. The handle has your XLR ports on it. It's not like the FX9 that has an XLR built into the body. All the ways to get great audio into this camera are in that audio handle, so you have to have it on. The other main gripe I have for this camera is the codecs, or should I say the lack of codecs. On something like the A7S, you know, we've got several codec options for varying file sizes, which is something that is not talked about enough. That's a very welcome addition to a camera. You know, you've got XAVC-SI for intro recording on the A7S. You've got XAVC-S, which is kind of like the middle ground. It gives you almost as much quality as intro, but significantly smaller file sizes, and it's just more friendly for stuff like YouTube and events and just longer type work. And then you've got XAVC-HS, which is even more compressed, and the quality difference is pretty negligible. So you've got a lot of different options on something like the A7S depending on your project, and it's really frustrating not to have that in the FX6. On the FX6, you only have 2 codec options, and those are XAVC-I, which is your intro recording, your max quality, and then you've got XAVC-L, which is much nicer, smaller file sizes, but it's 8-bit. Why? Why? I don't know. This is another huge flop on Sony's part, in my opinion. Like, why can't we have a smaller codec that's also 10-bit? I should mention, if you're shooting 1080 on the FX6, then XAVC-L does become 10-bit, but if you're shooting in 4K, it's 8-bit, and it makes no sense to me. Moving on to the final con or quirk that I'll mention, it is simply the cheap and kind of stupid mic mount that comes on the top handle. It is very flimsy, it's prone to completely snapping off, and you kind of have to baby it if you don't want it to break. And then on top of that, it's really only made for Sony's microphones. It does not fit any traditional shotgun mic. You kind of have to add spacers or like the rubber kind of O-rings around them to be able to make them work, which is just dumb. So that was my short list of cons, plus a little rant mixed in there. We'll move on to the next thing that I think is really worth considering if you're thinking about upgrading to the FX6, and that is going to be back-end costs. So what I mean by back-end costs is really any infrastructure changes or upgrades you'll have to make as a result of getting into a new camera body. And this is something that I've been through twice now with both the A7S III and the FX6. When I upgraded to the A7S III, it really gave me a taste of my first professional video workhorse. And with that came heavier codecs, heavier files, and more expensive memory cards and everything like that. You don't really think about those incremental changes you need to make. The laptop that I had at the time was not handling the A7S files very well at all, and I was like, I'm gonna have to upgrade. The goals that I have in mind for my career and the type of gigs that I wanna be on, I'm gonna have to upgrade my laptop as well in order to be able to edit these files efficiently. And then I got hit with that again by the FX6. The FX6 needs even nicer memory cards. The batteries are more expensive. The rigging accessories are more expensive. Another thing you'll wanna think about is storage. How are you going to pack this camera? How are you going to travel with it? When you get into cinema camera territory, cameras like the FX6, they're a fair amount larger than stuff like the alpha cameras, and it's why a lot of people end up going with something like the FX3, the FX30, because the FX6 is a bit of a commitment when it comes to hauling around and traveling. I do a lot of travel and I'm on planes all the time for my work, and I simply just don't trust camera bags with the FX6. This is a camera I'm heavily invested in, so I throw it in my Pelican 1510 and I know that it's safe if it gets run over by a car on the tarmac or if it gets thrown into a lake somehow. The camera gear inside is going to be safe. And I know that insurance provides a little bit of that, but let's be real, you should be really protecting your gear on a daily basis regardless. So hopefully I've gotten the gears turning in your head a little bit as to whether or not the FX6 may be a viable solution for you if you're coming from mirrorless like I did. For the solo operator, for the run and gun filmmaker, and for the filmmaker that just feels the call to move up and to challenge themselves a bit more, knows that they want to be in this field for years, for decades to come, and just knows that this is what they're meant to do, I think the FX6 is a near perfect tool for that person. I have been so happy with this camera. I've used it on 2 or 3 gigs now and I straight up love it. I can't believe I ever had reservations about buying it, even with the quirks that it has. The only people I'll say I don't think this camera is super ideal for is for those that do just want the tiniest footprint possible, and for those that are just creating content, for YouTube and for daily content creation for Reels, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. The FX6 is way overkill. It is not what you need. There's a whole host of cameras that are much better for that, and they're better bang for buck when it comes to that too. I think for the FX6, if you're just using it for content creation, it's the point of diminishing returns, I think. It's too much camera for what that is. The main thing that I have loved about moving to the FX6 is it really just changes how I shoot. Just compared to the A7S, it just feels like a whole different world, and it's very scary at first, but when you start to ease into it and start to really just do your due diligence and take the time to learn it, you'll really see how incredible it truly is. And one of the things that I mean when I say it changes the way you shoot, and this is something that I should have mentioned earlier, but there is really not a ton of info online about the FX6, unless you like to do a lot of reading. I'm a YouTube guy, I'm a visual learner, and there's a couple of key creators on YouTube for the FX6 that I really enjoy, but it is nowhere near the knowledge base of the alpha cameras, the A7S III, the A7 IV, so on and so forth. So it kind of forces you to just dig into the menus and really just kind of learn the camera from scratch. And it's a very rewarding and fun experience. I've learned a lot from joining Facebook groups surrounding the FX6 and going to blogs online. Specifically, Alistair Chapman, I think it's xdcam/user.com or something like that. I'll link him in the description below, but Alistair Chapman, like I said, is the GOAT when it comes to this camera and just FX cameras and Sony cameras really in general. He's just such a wealth of knowledge about this stuff, and he is who I've learned a ton of stuff about the FX6 from. One thing that I'll leave you with before closing out the video is that it is important to recognize which camera you need for which job. And this goes hand in hand with what I said earlier, determining if the FX6 fits into your workflow. I think that it's important to look at what you already have as well and see if the camera that you're adding to your kit can accomplish other work for you. I would argue that my A7S has become even more valuable since getting the FX6 because I know more clearly what the role of the A7S is. This is going to be the camera that I take if I only want to take one camera and need to travel a bunch, or if I need to pack as light as possible. The A7S gives me like 80% of the functionality of the FX6 in a much smaller package while getting the same image. And that's amazing. And then any of my more professional sit-down interview, run and gun, documentary type work, I'll throw the FX6 in the Pelican and use that, and then use the A7S as a B cam or even a photo camera on set. There's really a bunch of different ways these cameras can play together, and I think it is important to kind of see that relation when you're adding cameras to your kit. Definitely leave me a comment. Let me know what you thought about this video, if it was helpful for you, or just share a little bit about your journey. What are you looking to upgrade? What are you shooting with right now? I love to start some conversations in the comments, especially because we're growing a lot lately. I want to make some new filmmaking friends, so let's get acquainted in the comments, and while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe and like so that we can keep the growth going. And always remember that you are blessed and you are loved. And as always, I'll be back soon.